in person.
In person.
All right. What's your question?
All right. He's ready. On it.
I am.
Okay. Do you think you are a conflict avoider or conflict pursuer?
I think it's shifted a lot. I was really afraid of conflict when I was younger, for a number of reasons. I think some of it was like maturity and not, I didn't see the value or like what you could get from conflict, in the sense of like, you can get more clarity and you can actually like get closer to someone by having a difficult conversation. And I just thought it was always bad. So I think it's evolved. I definitely started as a conflict avoider, like at all costs. And where like I wouldn't advocate for myself, or I would just kind of shut it down. You just move on.
Shut it down.
Yeah, I was like, well, it's just better not to. I'll just not advocate for myself or not get what I want or like say what I want to say. That's better than having to have this conversation. That's not the case now. I mean, I don't chase it. I'm definitely not like a shit stirrer, because there are those people that I think like seek it out. It's not you either. I think that's like a narrative you used to have. That's not true.
Just kidding. Yeah, the people who like every time they go out, they end up in a bar fight, and you're like, how?
Yeah. You're like, what happened?
I thought you were going out for fun.
Yeah, like
how did you get
20 minutes ago you were fine. Yeah, no. So I think but I do recognize the value now. Like, if it needs to be had, or I would even say to the extent that I will encourage it if like the other person or persons like is resisting it. Like I recognize the value of that so much that I will lean in. And my dog friend. Yeah, so I think it's gotten better.
Okay.
I've gotten. I think I feel pretty balanced in it.
That's good. It's not a word you use often.
I know. Oh, I know. I hate balance.
Actually, Jesse and I did a podcast on that. You'll have to watch it. It's literally, he like blew my mind with it. I don't remember what the point was, but it was actually, I was like, oh, so I would say you're balanced in it.
Okay. I think, balance. In the right context, I think that's an okay. That's a whole nother podcast. We talk about balance and how I hate that word. So to that end, we're going to talk about difficult conversations today. We're doing a talk for Denver Startup Week.
Yes.
We're talking about difficult conversations. The title of the talk is Embracing Difficult Conversations, How Being Nice Creates a Shitty Team Culture. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today and give people some context for those that are not able to be in Denver and see our talk. So let's kick that off. I think so. Let me set the stage. The reason that we are talking about difficult conversations again is not that you should chase them or that like you need to have them for no reason. So we are not advocating that like you should be a shit stirrer or that you should be an asshole or that you should like be difficult for the sake of being difficult. That is not what we are talking about. What we are talking about and advocating for is that the by not having those conversations, those challenging or difficult conversations that people need to have specifically in the workplace, but this certainly goes into all areas of our lives.
Oh yeah.
100% like with your partners and your kids and the list goes on. Cause there's always conversations that we're probably avoiding. And so what we're saying is that when you do that, you're actually like being nice is killing your culture. Like by not respecting that individual enough to have the conversation that's actually going to help them grow and you grow and that relationship grow specifically or especially from a leadership perspective, you're doing that person a disservice. And that does not create or inhibits the creation of an environment of trust and autonomy and people showing up and doing their best work because they're too busy. Everyone involved is too busy thinking about the elephant in the room and the conversation that they need to have. And that massively impacts productivity and income. Like we have some very real stats on that of like it's a disease in organizations. So let's set the stage whether like let's pull back, and this really stems from like people pleasers is kind of where we've landed. So you walk us through what like who that is and why that is part of the issue, and then we can move from there.
I think a lot of times we people please and we're nice, right? Like we can tie people pleasing to being nice. That's why we show up nice, is because we're trying to people please. And I think that people pleasing has become one of those like stereotypes that we have normalized, in my opinion. And we've made it a little bit sexy. Like we're like, oh, I'm a people pleaser. Oh yeah. Like I think, which is great. Like I think in the counseling world or therapy, like I think we've brought a lot of attention to the challenges within people pleasing. But I think in the pursuit of making it an awareness, there's like a season in society that it normalizes it. And so what happens is instead of just changing that narrative, we've worked with lots of people like, oh, I'm a people pleaser. And I'm like, well, we're going to squash that shit. Like you don't get to say that anymore because it's not serving you. And why it's not serving you is because no one really talks about people pleasing is actually manipulation. And no one would be like, I'm a manipulator. Like no one wants to make that shit sexy. And so I'm like, quit saying that you're a people pleaser. That's not cute, because what you're saying is I manipulate people into believing and thinking, and I show up in a way that they accept me for what I think they are going to be pleased with. Therefore, it's manipulation. I'm not showing up in an honest way that's in alignment or congruent with my standards and my natural states. And we're not talking about personality. Like you said, we're not talking about like being an asshole. It's not about being an asshole. It's about showing up, vocalizing clearly, communicating what you need, what you want, and then showing up in a way that you're excited to be you. You're excited to connect with people from that state. And I think that it really does affect relationships because we can only pull that off for so long. We can only hold up this persona, this people pleasing for so long. And then all of a sudden we will show up differently or a little bit more authentically. And people like they're like, wait, what? You just changed the game. And so it breaks trust specifically in culture, but in all your relationships, if you're showing up and trying to people please and you're pushing yourself past your limits, you don't have, clear boundaries, all of those things, it's not going to last. Relationship then becomes unsustainable because you're showing up in a way that's unsustainable for yourself. That person all of a sudden feels manipulated.
So this gets us into the nice versus kind piece of the puzzle too, which is when we are people pleasing, the next thing that usually follows or in some form is, I'm just being nice. Like I was just being nice. Yeah, I was just being nice to that person. And we do it from a place of, I'm just being nice to like protect them or to make sure I don't rock the boat. And like, so I'm just being nice. And what we have come to recognize is that there is a very clear distinction between being nice versus being kind. And what we always say is clear is kind. And so when you are nice, and you can look this up, like we looked up the definition of this and I forget the specifics, but it was like nice actually is in service of like a self-fulfilling, like selfish approach. Like if we're being nice, that's because I'm trying to get something. There's like an undercurrent of selfishness there. If I'm being kind, then that actually is in service of someone else. I actually have a genuine interest in seeing the person or people that I am being kind to, like excel or be better on the other side of that act of kindness. And so in this instance, like that difficult conversation is an act of kindness.
Yeah.
And so when we are like, if the goal then, if we can all just say like, okay, well, if nice is like selfish and people pleasing and manipulative, and and that's not really like serving me or the people that I'm talking to, then I would like to be kind, right? Like, I think we could all agree that would be the better way to go about things.
Totally. Well, and one of the things too with nice versus kind was nice is like there's no action with nice, right? We talk about the idea that West Coasters are in America are nice because they'll see someone on the side of the streets and be like, oh, poor person, and keep driving. And then East Coasters are kind. They'll actually pull over and like help you change your tire.
Right.
They're more likely. There is an action involved with kindness. And I think the biggest upgrade there is so we'll just like use leadership for an example. When you're nice in leadership, you're like, oh, great job. And then you go fix it. Like, say someone does a project. You're like, great job, person. Great job, team member. And then you take it and have to go fix it before you send it to your investors or to your clients. You never told them what they needed to do. Therefore, there is no action that they can take. There's no growth on their side. You basically lied to their face because you had to adjust it, which happens all the time. We've caught ourselves doing this. We're like, thanks. I got to spend it all night like fixing this shit.
Yeah.
And then kind would be like, hey, this looks really great. This is a great start. This is what we need to do. I need you to go back, or like in the future, I'm going to make these adjustments. And in the future, I need you to think about it this way, and actually giving critical and helpful feedback to see that person grow. When we're kind and in leadership, we have to put our own needs and comfort to the side and put that person's growth first. And that's what kindness looks, right? Like when you stop to help somebody change a tire, you're not choosing comfort for yourself. You're actually choosing to help that person. And that takes action and discomfort, or maybe it's inconvenient. And so being kind actually can be very inconvenient in the current moment. Typically in leadership, changing a tire, like that's your good deed, I guess, for the day. You're not going to get like an ROI later, but in leadership, there is an ROI tied to being kind, because then 5 times from now, you're not going to have to, that person gets to grow. Therefore, they get to show up with more value because you were kind, versus being like, oh, thanks. This looks great.
Yeah. I mean, one of our like central kind of, beliefs is that people want to show up and do great work. As leaders, we just have to create the space for them to do that. And this is a prime example of that. It's like, by not having these conversations, by not giving them the tools and the feedback that they need, because it might be uncomfortable, right? Like you might feel like you're going to hurt that person's feelings, or they worked really hard on this project. And if it's not 100%, it would be, quote unquote, easier to just go do it yourself, to, use your example and fix it on the back end. But like, that is just a massive disservice to what creates a great culture, right? Because you've stifled that person's growth. Like, to your point, they don't have any information to be better, so they're going to do the same thing next time because they think that is up to the standards of the organization or the leadership. And like that example, you can extrapolate a version of that in like every aspect of leadership, right? It's like, you led that meeting well, or you did a great job on the phone call. And then like you send an email or a Slack message to everyone on that call or meeting, like behind that person's back, to like update information or correct facts or like whatever. And so this is where like it becomes a real problem, because at scale, you have everyone in your organization without the information they need to actually step up and do great work, which is fundamentally true. People spend too much time at work for it they want it to be valuable. Like, and that's a narrative that we're really committed to shutting down. It's like, no one wants to do great work, and you can't find like
hardworking people. There's no hardworking people.
Yeah. Then like, what are all these fucking people doing working hard? Right? Like they're here, they're working hard. It's a lot of it is a communication and a culture issue. And yes, like the requirements of people in the workforce are different now than they were 20 years ago. Sure, but that's always been the case. It will continue to evolve.
Yeah, but we get a choice. This is the thing that leaders don't understand. We get a choice on how they evolve. Like this whole conformity to the narrative, I'm like, no more. Like we have that. We have that in all of our companies where there's people that need growth, right? Like ourselves, we need raw and honest feedback. We need people to be kind enough to be like, you screwed that one up. That episode, not it. You said like 57 times. You should tone that down. You know what I mean? We have to be willing to have those people. And we'll do an episode on this, but we have to be willing to know who those people are who get to speak into our lives. And then we have to be willing to raise the standard. I think I love the movie Cruella. You've probably not seen that because you're watch very little TV. But they're usually not cartoons like me because I am a 5-year-old at heart. Cruella, like there's something, you should watch it. It's amazing. It's one of my favorites, but it's, it's 101 Dalmatians, the like remake.
I watched that one.
Okay, great.
I watched the OG version.
This one is so good because it's like the backstory of Cruella and it makes you fall in love with her. So anyways, the woman above her, really tragic story. Like she like pulls Cruella into this like top fashion company in London. And she's like brutal. This woman is like, she's like the shit, right? She's the person you want to work for. It's all the things. And like, she is so on it. Like the standards are so high. And there was something, we were watching it the other day, and there was something that kind of died inside of me that I'm like, I miss people rising to that standard. Like, did the boss do it right? Did the leader in the company do it right? No, she was awful. She was brutal. She was not nice. But she did provide this standard that allowed people to rise to their fullness. Like Cruella would not have been who she became, good and bad.
Puppy killer.
Yeah. I mean, it went dark. It was good for a second and then it went dark. There was some very deeply seated trauma. We won't go into that. Okay. But we just don't rise. And like, there's a healthy way to do that. Like if we zoom out, obviously that's not where we're going. But if we're kind and if Clear is kind, we provide consistent feedback, we provide kind feedback, we care for that person and their growth and them showing up as their best, we get to raise the standards in our companies versus just being like, there's no one to do the work. Nobody wants to do the work. These people, and first it was millennials, now it's Gen Z, and that's a whole new thing we hear on a daily basis. Yeah. Like, it's hard. I get it. Leadership's hard. But if you are clear and you focus on being kind, there is so much more that's possible versus being an asshole, being impatient. Clear is kind. Also, kind takes patience. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think to that end, like another piece of this kind of equation is to recognize that you're doing this for like what is on the other side of the conversation. So one of the reasons that we don't have these conversations or we resist the difficult conversations is because we look at the conversation, we describe it as like a roadblock, right? Like a tree falls on the road. You drive up to the tree and all you can see is this big tree in the road. And we're like, okay, well then this is what I can see. Well, let's imagine a scenario where like on the other side of that tree, if you just get past that, you go around it, you figure out a way to get through it, that it's like the trip that you want to take. It's where you want to go. It's your destination is on the other side of that roadblock. And so that is it also, to your point, like it requires patience because you also have to recognize that you're doing this so that yourself and the individual or individuals that you're having the conversation with can get to where they want to go. So you have to think about your outcome too, where like we also address these problems from like an immediate pain point solution. So to go back to our example of like, person puts a project together, it's not 100%. We on the leadership side, like spend our time fixing it and then we send it out. The immediate pain point is like that it wasn't 100%, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, well, that really wasn't up to like the standards of us or the organization or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like the first place that but that's not really what we're driving at. Like the conversation is actually, if we really think about it, that we're like, okay, like where are we going with this? What's the purpose of this difficult conversation to begin with?
Yeah.
It's actually so that person like develops the skills so that they might can be someone else in the company. Like if they have those skills, you might unearth talents that you or them don't even know they have. And or if at a very minimum, you just don't have to do it again. So where are you going? Well, they become, your primary voice for, putting together your quarterly reports for your investors or whatever, right? Like you're building something that is more destination driven. And so if you have the conversations from that place versus this like immediate reactive place, I think it is like I've found that it is kindness comes so much more naturally because you're not reactive, right? Like, are you frustrated that this thing didn't go well? Sure. But don't have the conversation from this like immediate pain point thing. Zoom out, take a second to understand like where you're going, what's the destination, what do you want on the other side of this conversation? And I feel like the kindness piece really kind of falls in because I don't know, it just seems to me, I'm like, oh, like that, like I want that person to excel. Like it's easy for me to be kind with that mindset because I don't want to hold somebody back. Like I want to show up in the best way possible so that someone has everything they need to do their best work. And so if I can do that, great. Like, so that just feels like a much easier place versus frustration of like what seems like extra work. And like, yeah, maybe it's not as like, it's not as easy for me to be kind in that place. Cause I'm like, you fucked it up. Like, shit, like I want to, we got a million other things going on, but it's so much easier for me to be patient and be kind if I just recognize it. Well, and it's never as big of a deal typically as we think. I mean, there's certainly times where there's some big issues, but
but it's not productive and it doesn't build, like you have to work the muscle. This is just like any muscle. If you're on, you're on a road and all of a sudden there's this big stump in the way, you're like, I don't even know how to address this. Like, I think that's the conflict, right? We're looking at this at the difficult conversation intersection. You're like, there's a stump and like, I can't get around it unless I deal with it. Right. So you're like, you look at it and you're like, I've never been here before. I don't know how to address this. Then you figure it out. You're like, I got to address this because I got to get forward. And most of the time, like you're saying, we're stuck on focusing on that. But what we're not thinking about in that moment is that if we don't take care of this, and like truly teach our team or the people around us, whatever, right? Like whatever the outcome is that you're wanting, if we don't address it in a way that's proactive and actually gain skills in the future, because usually it's a learning curve of some kind, even in relationships, like with your spouse. It's like, I need this, I'm not feeling supported, you didn't do this, whatever the case is. If you just tell them and you actually communicate it with clarity of what you want and what you're asking for, all of a sudden the next time it's going to be easier and the next time it's going to be easier. So we're working the muscle, and it's about working that muscle until either you get really good at having those conversations, but hopefully that person continues to grow and all of a sudden they just go away. And then with the next person, you're better at having that conversation. I think the avoidance creates more avoidance, right? Like a body in motion stays in motion. So if we just keep having the conversations instead of letting everything pile up and avoid it, we're just going to get better. The only way you're going to get better is to do it, right? The only place you have to go is up with difficult conversations. And it does grow people. So if we're doing that, then it just continues to get easier.
Yeah, I think 100%. It's not always, it can become your default approach, and I think that's our goal in talking about this, is that when you do this consistently as your default approach to how you communicate with people, it has a massive impact on your culture. So also, like, yeah, this is not a one and done thing. Like, you have to do this consistently because there will always be something, right? Specific, certainly as you have a bigger team and there's more going on. But again, even in your family, like on a weekly basis, this is going to come up at some point in your life. So you have to continue to do it. And then it's not as much of a heavy lift. And so that's where I want to like encourage people to think about like, what's the one thing, right? Because also it's hard to start. And if this is not a muscle that you've been working, which is commonplace because it's uncomfortable and we get that. Like what's the one thing you can do, right? What's the one conversation, the one shift you can make? I would start with, thinking about, again, like what's the shift you can make from just seeing the roadblock in front of you to seeing what's on the other side of that. So start to shift your mindset around these conversations and think like, who can you talk to, or what needs, who have you done a disservice by not having the kind? Start with one thing, right? And start to work that muscle. And make this a meaningful part of like how you work and how you relate to other people. Because I think, again, we have some, like, there's stats on this. It's just like a systemic issue where we're seeing just like hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of lost dollars from like productivity and from turnover and from lack of engagement and from lack of trust. And like when these things aren't created, when they're not central aspects of the environments that we create in our organizations as leaders, like there is a cost, and the cost is a lot higher, and the pain, I promise you, will be much higher than the pain and friction required to have a conversation in the first place. Yeah. Like, and that's another, I think, just important shift. Like, what's more uncomfortable? Like doing this and working that muscle and getting good at this, or all of the other bullshit that comes in on the other side of like not having a culture where people are able to step into their full potential and do great work and feel valued and autonomous and trusted. Like, it's like a no-brainer. Like for me, when I think about that, I'm like, holy shit, I better get good at this. Yeah. Right. Like I better keep leaning in, because I certainly don't want what not doing this creates.
Well, and our teams are always watching us also. Like when we are able to have difficult conversations and address the things that we need to address in our organizations, we're teaching the rest of our team how to do it. We're the example, regardless of whether you're managing up or down, wherever you are, you're an example in your organization. You're an example in your household. So if you continue to do this well, it invites people to also do it well. Like I can't tell you how many times I have like opened up a hard conversation and then like everyone around us has also been like, actually, we probably need to talk about that. Right. Or like having dinner with a girlfriend and I'm like, I probably need to address this with my husband. She's like, oh shit, me too. And you're like, oh, it's actually kind of contagious. The avoidance is contagious because we're not talking about it. But on the other side, it's also contagious. And we're always telling people in our organizations how to have these conversations by how we do it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we'll notice that I think one of the things that we hear a lot is people like, oh, this, key player, they're just off their game. I'm like, well, have you asked them what's going on? No. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're noticing they're not like they've been, like one leader was like, this guy's an asshole. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, let's talk about that. Start asking questions. He's like, well, he wasn't an asshole for 13 years. I've worked with him for 13 years and he hasn't. I'm like, so he's been an asshole for 2 years, not an asshole for 13 years. And like, he was a great leader, like, all the things. And I'm like, have you asked him what he needs? Like, have you talked to, and he was like, no. And you just get so stuck in your shit. It's like, if something's not working for you, then address it. Just be vulnerable. Just ask them. Mm-hmm. And chances are you're going to get a positive result, but you have to step in and be clear. You have to be like, hey, I noticed you're off. Like, what's going on? Like, how can I support you? What do you need as a leader? So many times those questions can open up something that's really beneficial. And, we've done a lot of research on this. 70% of people say that they're avoiding a difficult conversation in their workplace all of the time, which means, and then you look at the other stats that like 58% of people leave a job because of unresolved conflict. And you're like, those numbers are costing us, like you said, millions of dollars. And we just keep staying stuck in the same place. Mm-hmm. So the only opportunity there is to do this well and encourage your teams to also do it well. And then you get to have a positive workplace. People are more engaged. Like the stats are ridiculous. And it really does create a better environment. Nobody does their best work when they feel upset about something and they're not addressing a difficult conversation. So I just feel like, we talk about this a lot. This is one of our main talks because it's such a challenge in all workplaces, including ours.
Yeah, no, we're not absolved of the issue. I mean, because it's like it's it's part of the human condition, right? Like, I mean, communication is necessary. Like I've often said, like, I think as we move through the world, like our only job is to continue to be better communicators. Like that's really all we're doing, right? Is like, it's how you talk to yourself and how you talk to others. So you need to work on getting those right, like as much as possible all the time. And that's an evolving skill. And it's one that's maybe impossible to master, but I think we should like try to move towards it. And yeah, so it's something that's always going to be prevalent because as people grow, things change. And then it's certainly in the like workplace, it's so dynamic. There's just a million things going on. And as you have different opportunities and different team members and as your team, you bring in new personalities and right. It's like, you're creating like a schoolyard scenario. Like every time you hire somebody else or every time you grow or every time you bring in consultants or whatever, we have all these different personalities that are just smushed together. And I mean, it's kind of like ripe for, and I'm not saying that like there's always going to be drama, but I think we have to just be aware of the fact that communicating those differences or how people were just being aware, right? Like I just think that is part of the reason that, or part of where this comes from is that we also can just turn a blind eye. And like, maybe it'll go away, or maybe like, it's not my deal because it's not in my, like, I'm in this position. I don't have to. And like, it impacts everybody, right? Like, even if it's kind of like, I can't see it from my house situation. Like you can, like it's impacting your house. Yeah. Any closing words?
If you need to have a hard conversation, let this be the invitation that lights fire under your ass and go do it.
Yeah. As always, for resources and other information, we have some blogs on this topic. You can go to impactinitiative.network and you can reach out to us there. We'd love to hear from everyone. You can drop us a comment in our contact box. Let us know as we continue to move through this podcast. This is episode 4. Let us know what's resonating, what you're finding useful, any particular topics that you want us to weigh on. We're going to continue to refine this and continue to develop it. So the community is a big part of that for us, and we want to be a resource and a value add. So impactinitiative.network. Reach out, let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time on Impact Minded.